Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 1st of April. It's 12:45, and you're watching the Lite Bite Lunch. So here we are into the second quarter of 2021 already, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Jennifer McShane, freelance journalist, Geraldine Hewitt from Legacy Mobile Dog Training, Pauline Bowen from Pass Right Driving School, and Dennis Norton TD in his role as the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Social Protection, Community, Rural Development and the Islands. You're all very welcome along to the show.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do very quickly to give people a chance to get to know each of you individually, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to tell us a little bit about what you do yourself. So we'll start with yourself, Jennifer.
Okay, so I've been self-employed now since November 2018. So it feels a lot longer when you're self-employed. I think that's the main thing I realised. But I've had both kind of staff jobs with media companies, and I've also been out on my own. So it's significantly more challenging to be self-employed. I suppose the biggest thing I've kind of learned since starting it is there's loads of kind of variables that you don't think about when you go out to be self-employed. It's kind of a one-person show, I suppose. You have to do the job, but then you also have to do your admin. You have to do accountancy things, and that sort of thing. So that's really what I found to be the most challenging aspect of it, and that's before going into the trying to get steady work aspect of it. I work with a few different media companies, magazines, and I do a lot of social work as well, so a lot of community management for social profiles. And what I quickly learned from my own work is not to put all my eggs in one basket. So it's to kind of pivot and be able to do more than just my kind of strength would be journalism and copywriting, but I quickly knew that doing that alone wasn't going to pay all the bills. So it was to pivot and do kind of a lot of courses and try and fill the gaps in any knowledge that I had, and just really utilize all of the skills that I have. And as a person, like, no one likes to shout about themselves, and that's particularly true of Irish people. We don't like to say what we're very good at, but you almost have to become a brand, I found, in yourself, and really be able to push yourself out there and say, this is what I can do, this is what I'm good at. And for a lot of people, that's not easy. Like, I hate doing that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, just don't talk about me. But you have to when you're self-employed. So for me, that's been the biggest challenge. And then I suppose the importance of a network. For me, it's utilizing the network that you have. So that's what I've been trying to do since I've been self-employed, and it ebbs and flows like most things. You have good months and you bad months, and there was I suppose a bit of a dip when the pandemic first hit in March last year, but I think that's the case for everyone. And things are slowly kind of steadying off now. So I suppose my ultimate would be to get maybe a part-time thing that was consistent, and then keep on my freelance on the side. So we shall see. But for now, it's going reasonably well. I have no complaints in that way. So I'm lucky. And thank you to everyone who still hires me and commissions me out for work. So that's the biggest thing.
Well, that's great. We're delighted to have you joining us today. So next we'll hear quickly from Geraldine Hewitt from Legacy Mobile Dog Training.
Good afternoon, everybody. I set up Legacy Mobile Dog Training in August 2019 because we realised that their dog training classes and lessons in that environment don't suit every puppy. So the idea behind the business was that I go to the clients' homes where puppies are relaxed, dogs are relaxed, and the clients are relaxed. So you achieve much more per session than you do in a group environment with these puppies and dogs. And some people, because people do get embarrassed sometimes if their puppies or dogs act not the way they want them to act. So it's a nice sort of blame-free environment when they're at home. But of course, from August 2019, then in October, I had major surgery. I was literally just getting over that then, and 2020, then COVID hit. So I'm literally finding my feet. Fantastic network support network of people, trainers and non-trainers alike. The support I received since starting is amazing. And in some ways, COVID has been quite good to me in that it made me pivot and think more about online computer courses, Zoom sessions, and bits and pieces like that. So going forward, I don't think it's something that I will stop doing. It's just another addition to the services I can provide. And I'm also one of very few of Ireland's qualified canine CPR and first aid instructors. So if anybody's looking for any courses, just let me know.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks for that, Geraldine. And I see Brody hiding away in the background there.
He's
He's asleep, yes.
He's gorgeous.
He's a hard owl life, Brody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll quickly hear then from Pauline from the Pals Right Driving School.
How you doing? I'm driving instructor, mother of 10-year-old, done an awful lot of homeschooling. Prefer to teach on the road now than doing maths and Irish. In March, I would have been 30 years a driving instructor. I started off as an employee, franchisee, and for the last 10 years or more, I've been working for myself. Based in Dublin 4, so I've covered kind of basically all the Dublin 1 to 6 areas, doing Dean's Grange, Dunleary, Raheny test centres. Besides teaching learners, which I absolutely still love, and love actually teaching the nervous drivers, I would also do post training, which would be kind of somebody who might want to do motorway or parking, and also doing fleet training where I go into a company and take out people where they would be driving for a part of their job. I like that part of the job as well. I do that for myself, but I'd also do it as part of other companies as well, like kind of, when I'm actually driving. I suppose the whole driving world has changed a lot. When I started originally, people could just buy a car, go out driving. There was even no registration of instructors. Registration came in about 10, 12 years ago, so all instructors are now registered. All learners now have to do 12 lessons minimum with a driving instructor, and then support that with private training as well. Like kind of the past year has been challenging. We've been on and off. We got back to go to work from July till about December. Now I'm only out doing pre-test lessons with essential workers who have a driving test date, which is quite limiting. So, but the one thing I suppose I do know is that when we finish with COVID and our restrictions, work will be busy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'd say there's no question about that. I mean, the only thing I'd wonder, and maybe Dennis can shed some light or share his views on it. Actually, just before I let you go off there, Pauline, we do have a question coming in there for you, so we'll just get that pulled up on screen there now.
Based in Dublin 4.
Right. Actually, I think Monique is actually based in Dublin 4 as well, so we may be putting you in touch with each other after the show. That's great.
That's grand.
That's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. That's the way it works, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely perfect. And the last of our panel today then is Dennis Norton. I won't repeat the whole panel. He's a chair of it because in actual fact you could almost, I'd say, play word bingo with the number of different committees that Dennis has served on over the years and the different ministries, etc. So I'll let Dennis introduce himself fairly quickly. Thanks.
I'm glad you put in the caveat of fairly quickly. Given a politician an empty platform like that, they could very easily spend the whole show talking. But I suppose, look, first of all, I'm a TD representing the constituency of Roscommon, Galway, which covers pretty much most of County Roscommon and East Galway. I previously would have represented Leitrim and Longford as well, and I've been a Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment, served at European level on the Council of Ministers as well. I suppose, look, from a national perspective, probably the two big issues that I would have consistently raised over the years is the issue of our health services, particularly the delivery of health services in our regional locations. And secondly, then would be the issue of children's rights. And I would have done a considerable amount of work down through the years on that. Locally in the constituency, I'd be very much looking again at the health services, but also trying to support small local businesses because they're the backbone of our economy. We don't have a lot of foreign direct investment in the middle of the country. And then in my role of chairman of the parliamentary committee, I would do a lot of work in terms of rural development. As minister, I was lucky enough to spearhead the delivery of the National Broadband Plan, which is now being delivered on the ground. But as I always said during at that time as minister, one, that broadband was like rural electrification. It's going to have that big an impact. But secondly, it's not about the infrastructure itself. It's about the opportunities that it now brings to people, to rural communities, in delivering something very innovative and different. And I suppose what we've launched this week in terms of the rural plan now talks about the opportunity in terms of remote working or working outside our cities, which will hopefully bring more people into rural Ireland.
That's absolutely brilliant, and a nice short synopsis, which is absolutely ideal in the timescale we have to make sure we can keep things moving along. One of the things we like to talk about on the show quite a lot is lockdown and the impact it's had on business. Now, as Geraldine was saying there, for Geraldine, it's been a case of it's opened up new avenues. For Pauline, it's been very, very tricky. For Jennifer, it's had a mixed bag. And again, in fairness, I think for you, Dennis, it's been a case that the amount of time that has been spent working out how you're going to work and you perfecting your shortcuts from Dáil into the convention centre and this type of thing has certainly been an experience. Have you picked
Funny that you mentioned that, because in Dublin for the last, since the Dublin bikes really came out, I've used the Dublin bikes in Dublin a lot of the time. But yesterday I was coming over the Samuel Beckett Bridge on my Dublin bike, coming from the convention centre back to Leinster House. And there was two young ladies going over the bridge. And next thing, that's Dennis Norton, as I was flying by. So all I could do was wave at them because I'd gone by. But so sometimes it's amazing, even, a middle-aged guy with no hair can get a couple of heads turning in Dublin.
Well, there's definitely something to be said for that. There's a hope for me, so. Mind you, I'm not sure that our director Cheryl will be too happy to hear that. So, I mean, looking at lockdown and looking at the impact of it, and again, personally, I feel lockdown has been a necessary evil. We haven't had. It's not something that I don't subscribe to the idea of herd immunity or that type of thing. Some do, and I'm sure they have their reasons to, and I perfectly respect that. But for me, I don't see the sense in it. But when we're looking at the path to recovery, how do we prevent more of these protests like we've seen without infringing on people's right to protest? Where does any of the panel see the secret in getting through this and getting to the point where we can return to whatever the new beginnings are going to be? I personally don't like the phrase the new normal. So to where the new beginnings of the way of doing life is. Would anyone have any thoughts on that?
Vaccines.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only thing that we know, actually, well, as much as we can know, with the fact that everything is still very early days, even with the vaccines. But we know, and I'll always use the UK here, we know, for examples, we know that they will work. We've seen it before. Like, look, we only had, 3 weeks of semi-freedom at Christmas, and we were the worst in Europe then after that. So I think a lot of kind of public compliance has to be thought of as well. People can only take things so much before they actually start to crack. And I don't think, unfortunately, that a lot of attention has been paid to by the government, maybe on mental well-being for people during this. So when they're saying kind of keep, steady, hold a bit longer, I think they're not saying, well, how can you do that effectively? So that's one of the things as well. So if maybe there's a different way out if all those variables were considered. But I think the tactic over in Ireland is very much just to be like, oh, everyone just keep doing what they're doing the exact same way and just stay the same till we figure out what to do. So I don't think that's really been effective.
Again, I
think the best,
I think there has to be a little bit of balance on that, in the sense that if the Taoiseach and Tánaiste to come out and say, okay, from date A we're going to have this, from B we're going to have that, from date C we're going to have the other, and then all the other variables that come into play mess that up, they're going to be the worst in the world. If they come out and say, this is what the plan is. But for me personally, I think the only part of the plan as they're giving it at the moment is if we were being told, these are the variables that can change that. Right, these are the modelling is we need to look at. And I mean, I don't know about anyone else. How does anyone else feel about having the figures broadcast every single day at 6 o'clock?
It does more harm than good, to be honest with you. I think it just fuels people with anxiety. I think the way they're framed, the way it's framed, I think if they said, this is happening, but we're still on track, we can still do this. I think it's too framed on the figures. It's not really about the figures anyway. It should be about vaccines now, vaccine uptake, hospital admissions, and, ICU admissions, and it's still on case numbers all the time. So I think it's
I think I totally agree with you, Jennifer. I just think we need to know how many people are in hospital with it and the vaccine figures. Everything else is just,
it's an addition to that,
Yeah.
Yeah, but the difficulty is, and look, I made that very same argument, Jennifer, in the Dáil last October to the minister, to the Taoiseach, that should be our focus in relation to it. Now, at the time, we didn't have vaccine, but the difficulty is that the particular strain of the virus that we're dealing with at the moment, the UK strain, if you're purely looking at hospitalizations, they can ramp up very quickly based on community infection. And the mortality rate and the hospitalization rate is significantly higher. So I think if we were dealing with the strain that we were dealing with this time last year, which was the original strain, or the strain that we were dealing with last October, which was the Spanish strain, then that works. The difficulty with the UK strain is that it has just been so contagious. And that's why the medical experts are providing the advice that they are. But I think you're right, and this is something I've said privately to government. The whole area of mental health is an area that's been ignored. And even something as simple, and I made this point to some of the people in government recently, if they were to allow click and collect for people in paint shops, the same in relation to garden centres and stuff like that. So the people, at least, if they couldn't leave their house, could at least be doing something constructive and active around their house. The other thing is, like, I've seen so many tradesmen who are working in vacant buildings or working on their own, who could very safely have continued working through these restrictions without imposing any risk. And I think click and collect is another example of that. So I think there could have been a lot more done and still apply the same levels of restrictions that we have at the moment. But I think you're right. The future from here is vaccination. But it's not just about making sure everyone in Ireland is vaccinated or in the UK, and hopefully that will happen over the coming months. But we're not through the gap in relation to this virus until everyone globally is vaccinated. Because if we are vaccinated here in Ireland, the UK, and across Europe, and you still have a reservoir of this virus in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, a new strain could come out of some of those countries that is resistant to what we've already been vaccinated against. And all of a sudden, we're back to square one again. So it's important that we ensure that vaccine is made available on a global level, not just a domestic level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
it's just there are areas in the country who have been very, very good, and they've got very, very low case numbers. There's some not having cases for days on end, and people are getting very dejected because they're still under the same level 5 lockdown as the rest of the country, where some areas aren't behaving well at all.
But even if you're living in an area that has high numbers, but you have behaving, it's very disheartening. Like, kind of, you know what I mean? We don't go out beyond our 5K. We don't, like, kind of, you know what I mean? And at times even going out for work. I don't, like, kind of, as I said to someone, are you essential worker? Well, maybe, kind of. Well, sorry, I'm not going to take you. I know there's other instructors that will.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
very disheartening when you're trying to stick to all the rules, and then you see, like we saw all the pictures the other day, and I'd live very close to Milltown where all those people were gathering and partying away. And, you know,
Yeah.
somebody, all you need is one person there to spread
Yeah.
that. And
Absolutely.
as Dennis said, it is so viral this time. This one is
Yeah.
so viral. Like, kind of, you know, that, you know, that's really the hard thing. And it's just trying to get that collective. And I think people are just fed up. But there's a percentage of people, and what I think they said is 80% of people are actually adhering to all the rules. But it's that other percentage that's kind of going to keep us
Yeah.
in this.
Well, and this is the whole thing. It's the small 5 or 6%
Yeah.
who
Yes.
are blatantly ignoring the rules.
Yeah.
Right? They're
Yeah,
the
and
ones that are the biggest problems.
But coming back to your point, Pauline, you're right, and it's really frustrating. And look, I represent a constituency where, thankfully, other than a small number of outbreaks, we've been pretty good in terms of the case numbers. And the same, Rory, for you in Leitrim as well. But for example, this weekend now, we are opening up a walk-in test centre in Ballinasloe because the incident rate has gone up significantly there. So, you know, you can take somewhere which has been clear all along, and yet there can be a flare-up because of the particular strain of the virus that we're talking about at the moment. But to address the point that you made, Pauline, and this is something that I've taken up directly with the Taoiseach, that what we should be doing is that where there is an outbreak and someone tests positive, all of their close contacts should be isolated until they go clear. At the moment, what happens if the 5 of us are in a room together and I test positive, then you're contacted and you're asked to go and have a PCR test. And based on the result of that PCR test, you're then asked to isolate. Now, people are supposed to isolate from once they're contacted in relation to a close contact, as being a close contact. But what should happen is the minute I test positive, all of my close contacts automatically have to isolate for 14 days until they can prove otherwise. And everyone within your household should be treated in the exact same manner. All of a sudden, there's a risk for each and every one of us to meet up. And you're going to be an awful lot more careful when we do meet up that you don't pose a risk to someone else. And I think it's that different approach. The capacity is there in terms of the contact tracing now and in terms of the testing. And that aggressive approach needs to be taken to eradicate new pockets that may arise. And I have an example that I gave to the Minister for Health and the HSE last week, where a school in my constituency tested positive. There's a child in the school who was tested positive for COVID. The children that were a close contact were contacted by the HSE. They had to isolate, but the members of their families didn't have to isolate. And yet when they went to the local test centre told them until the child goes clear, everyone in that house has to isolate. So that lack of clear information and instruction is adding to the problem.
So I also fear there's going to be a lot of suspicion when things do start opening up, and you're going to be half worried that you see somebody on the street, right? Oh, they brushed against me. Have I caught something? Right? And I think again, the whole reality of COVID, and one thing that I think needs to be screamed and shouted from the rooftops, before we see the full impact of COVID on mental health, right, or on long-term health for those that were unfortunate enough to have caught COVID, right, it's going to take several years. But there needs to be planning now that there's going to be adequate mental health services available. Like, there's no point in somebody coming along, right, in 3 years' time, the doctor saying, look, because of the effect lockdown has had on you, I'm going to refer you to mental health services, and for them to get a letter, yes, we hopefully we'll get you to see a consultant in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
It's about planning for that at this stage. I think is going to be a large part of it. I think there needs to be a lot more made of the celebration of coming out of the worst of COVID. And I think that's, if the whole thing was being turned as where previously we were looking at these type of numbers, now we've got them down to this, from my mind, will help change the mindset in people. Like at times when I watch the news, it almost feels like they almost feel joyful in reporting the numbers.
I think, though, and I can understand this, is that they're afraid to go, I think, too heavy over here on that, in case people go, oh, well, that's grand. We just don't have to abide by restrictions anymore. Do you know what I mean? Because some people will. They'll see it as, okay, well, they're saying the worst of it's over, so we're all grand. Do you know what I mean? So I think they're afraid of that. And also, one of the big things that I find during all this is the lack of clarity on just basic information when it comes to getting tested, to who has to isolate when and for how long, is still a big issue. People still don't know the basics. Even people I talked to went, I didn't know, like, I had to totally self-isolate if someone else gets it, or like, it's basic things people still don't know. And that's why I think case numbers, even with the new variant, which is highly contagious, I still think people are going, I didn't know that. I think I know what the rules are. I think it needs to be pushed again properly. You need to do this if you have symptoms X, Y, Z. And I think that has gone over a lot of people's heads. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
But it's even like, sorry, go ahead, Polly.
No, I was going to say, I was at a funeral, a lady I knew died of COVID. I wasn't in the church, stood outside the church back at the beginning of March, and it was a very small funeral, there was no great numbers. But 2 days later, I got contacted to say I was a close contact, even though I was outside the church. And if I spoke to the family for 2 minutes, would have been about it. But I did isolate, I did stay at home for the 14 days. I did get a text every day from HSE telling me to stay, that I wasn't allowed. So there is a certain amount of information out there, but it's how people take it.
Yeah.
Because when I got my first negative, you're kind of going, oh, great, maybe I can just do this or maybe just do that. But so the information is out there, but I think some people are tired of it, and some people just see it and just ignore it anyway.
I think there's some confusion when you hear terms like you have to isolate, but then the next day you're hearing the comment is you have to restrict your movements.
Yeah, it's interpretation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Isolate and stay away from everybody within your house as well.
Yeah.
And restrict your movements is not go outside your house except for an individual walk.
Yeah.
But I suppose the information is there, depends on how people read it and take it and how they feel. Because when I got the first text, I kind of went, I'm 99% sure, I'm 99% not going to have it.
Yeah.
But it's like something that I dealt with as minister. Like, we have a huge problem in this country in terms of food waste, and the difference between the use by days and the best before days. There's absolute and utter confusion. And like, I have friends of mine that I went to college with, who have degrees and some of them PhDs, and yet still can't get their head around that particular point.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, I think definitely. Well, as you've moved on to the food subject, I'm going to quickly run through the panel and ask each of you what your perfect light lunch would be. So, Pauline, what would your light bite lunch be?
Well, at the beginning of lockdown, my daughter was watching TV and she found out how to make bruschetta. And that's my light lunch. She makes it toast, garlic, and we can find wild garlic around here, at this time of year, and tomatoes, and that's our light lunch.
Very good. I think we've lost Geraldine there. Hopefully she'll be back with us now in a minute. And Jennifer, what about yourself?
This probably doesn't even count as a lunch, but since kind of lockdown, I'm obsessed with smoothies. Like, just smoothies generally. That's all I want to drink. So that's like, I only look forward to having one like every day, which is, I don't know why, but it's probably the sugar from all the fruit. But it's just something that's kind of one of the weird lockdown things, is that all I want is some kind of smoothie or juice or something. And that nearly fills me up. If you put a lot of fruit in there, that nearly fills me up, for a good portion of it. So that's my thing.
So what about yourself, Geraldine? What would be your go-to light bite lunch?
Well, on a day like today, a Greek salad with some feta cheese and some crusty bread and balsamic vinegar, the bread dipped into that, just yummy. As soon as we can't travel, I can pretend I'm in Greece.
Bring the island.
I just need a waiter called Stavros waiting on my every whim. Wouldn't that be lovely?
And what about yourself, Dennis? What would you opt for?
Well, I'm just thinking about Geraldine there with the weather we have in the west of Ireland. We'd end up having that salad once a year, I think. But my light bite lunch is, since the first lockdown, I learned to cook brown bread, and the recipe I have is a gluten-free brown bread made of oats. So I have a slice of that, a slice of vintage cheddar on it. And during the lockdown last year, my little daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, she started growing tomatoes. So some of her tomatoes on the vintage cheddar on my own brown bread.
Well, I'll tell you, we might get a copy of that recipe off you and share it up on the page.
We can do that, no problem at all.
Yeah, no, it's something. Right, well, now we're going to get on to the main subject I really wanted to get us to talk about today, which is the Rural Development Plan and relocation for the public sector. And I think the best way to introduce the plan is, again, I'll ask Dennis, as his role as chairman, to just give us a brief overview of what it actually means, rather than getting into, I mean, the report itself is very lengthy with quite a number of recommendations in it. So maybe you can give us a synopsis of it that's in easy language.
In a nutshell, what the whole rural development strategy is about is trying to make rural Ireland a place where people would want to live. I suppose any of us that come from rural Ireland, either by choice or necessity, we live in rural communities. But it's to get people maybe outside of that location. Why would they want to come and locate in Leitrim or Roscommon? So you've seen over the last number of years, particularly over the last 5 years, huge investment into recreational amenities, which have really stood to us over the last 12 months, tourism facilities and so forth. So that social infrastructure is being put in place and will continue to be put in place. And because of the rollout of the National Broadband Plan now, which will mean within 5 years from now, every single home in Ireland will have access to a minimum of 500 megabits per second fibre broadband. It now provides people with an opportunity to live outside of our cities, rear their family outside of our cities, and still hold down a full-time job. And while this is happening in the private sector, and I suppose the big leaders have been Microsoft and Amazon, Google, now Twitter, and some of the other organizations, private sector organizations are doing that. I have neighbours of mine at home now who are working with these companies in the Silicon Docks here in Dublin, but physically based back in County Roscommon. And the next phase now is to try and do that within the public service. So the objective is to have 1/5 of our civil servants working remotely. And I think when we talk about remote working, we're not talking about people working at the kitchen table. I think it'll probably be very much blended. For the private sector, it'll probably mean that they'll maybe work maybe 2 half days a week from their kitchen table or from their home, maybe 3 days a week from a hub, a local digital centre. And we have across the west of Ireland now, we have 120 of those. The objective is to increase that to 400 over the term of this plan. And then maybe 1 day a week or 1 day a fortnight, you'd come to Dublin, to the corporate headquarters, to work there for the day. So that type of blended working. In terms of the civil service, it probably will be that they will work from central hubs in rural locations. So if we take the Department of Social Protection, which is a very good example, they have offices in Carrick-on-Shannon, Sligo, Donegal, in Longford and Roscommon Town. So you'll probably see staff that live or close to Roscommon Town, rather than commuting to the pensions office in Sligo every day, could work from a hot desk in Roscommon Town or in Longford Town. That type of blended working. So that's what, in a nutshell, this strategy is about.
I mean, it's a fabulous strategy. And as I said, I read through the report over yesterday and last night, and even read a little bit more on it this morning. And I really do see, I have grave concerns about infrastructure for all these little villages. Like, is the idea to attract people who have left these villages and bring them back to that area? Or is this about actually bringing in new young families, get them out of Dublin, easing up the housing market in Dublin a little bit, to the rural areas where you get far more bang for your buck?
It's both. So, for example, there's quite a lot of young families now that have relocated back to County Roscommon who were originally from there. So, maybe someone that I went to school with who moved to Dublin, got married, started to raise a family in Dublin. They're now moving back to the likes of Roscommon, holding down their jobs still in Dublin, but because they now have broadband, what they're actually doing in a number of cases is moving back into the family home, doing up the family home, and their parents are moving out into smaller accommodation inside in the villages or local towns, which is more convenient for them in terms of services and public transport. But the other side of it is as well, like we have right across many of our rural villages, a lot of vacant properties. They could have been a shop with a house upstairs, a residential upstairs, and the objective is to try and bring families that are either from the area and moving back, or new people coming into the area, into those vacant properties, releasing properties in Dublin and taking pressure off the housing market in Dublin. So just to explain to you, at the moment, the government pays a subsidy of €30,712 on average to develop a service site here in the Dublin area. And what I have suggested is, if you gave a young couple half of that in a grant to refurbish a vacant house in some of our smaller villages, it brings life back into that village. You're probably going to see a football kicked on the street of that village for the first time maybe in a generation. It's saving the state €15,712, and it's taking pressure off the housing market in Dublin.
Absolutely.
Okay, but is the infrastructure there then for people who are going back there with young families? Are the schools there? Are the football pitches there? Are the doctors, dentists? Is all that there?
Yeah, so the schools are there. In fact, a lot of the schools in rural Ireland have vacant rooms because the population has fallen. They now have, and within the next 5 years, they'll have better broadband than they have in the city of Dublin, which is a big turn up for the folks. In terms of recreational infrastructure, in terms of sports organisations, they have been very well funded over the last 20 years. So there are very, very few sporting organisations now that don't have their own football pitch, don't have their own dressing rooms. What we've seen over the last 5 years is significant investment in other recreational facilities, tracks and trails, cycle routes and that. So they are beginning to happen now, and there's quite a lot of them that have been used during the lockdown. There's an awful lot more public lands being opened up. So there's huge amounts of amenities, designated walks where, like, I can within 5 kilometres of my house, I can go on what's called the Beara Breffni Ways, which is a walk that runs from the Beara Peninsula in West Cork up to Blackline in Cavan. And I could walk for days along that route and never run into anyone if I don't want to. So that type of isolation is there. Now you can call into some of the local villages if you want to as well. So the infrastructure has been put in place. Now what we're trying to do is to exploit that and bring people back into those communities that have been devoid of population in recent years.
Right, well, I see we have another question coming in from somebody there, so if I can just... Sharon's going to get it up on the screen now for us, I hope. So, Maggie Garrity would love to see hot desks established in small villages, use existing business premises. Rural broadband at the moment is only following the main roads.
That's true.
Yeah, so Maggie has raised a pretty valid point there in that, first of all, the fibre broadband that's in rural Ireland at the moment is built out from villages. It was built out by the company Air. So National Broadband Ireland that have now got the contract will be building out from the towns right into every one of those rural townlands that haven't got broadband to date. And they will be bringing the fibre optic cable to them because it's actually the cheapest long-term solution rather than some of the current technologies that are being used at the moment. So that is happening as we speak in parts of my constituency, but it will take 4 to 5 years to complete that out.
Oh, yeah.
But what is happening now at the moment is in most of the towns now, there are hot desking facilities available. They're being built out into some of the rural communities as we speak. And the intention is, as part of this new rural plan, that vacant commercial premises, maybe a vacant pub in a village, can actually now be converted into a hot desking facility. So if you take in my own area in County Roscommon, if you take in Ballyforden, the local GA club had a vacant room there that they used to hold meetings in. That has now been fibred up and is a hot desking facility. The community centre in Cannes and Brideswell, they now have a wireless connection there, so people can work remotely from those types of locations. Funding is now being provided to insulate those premises, to provide the hot desks, the physical desks, and so forth. So it is beginning to move on.
And I mean, it's a plan. I'll vouch for the fact the plan works because I'm actually sitting in one of those hubs, the Enterprise Centre in Ballinamoor here. So, I mean, I see the speed I can work at. If I was working from home, I couldn't be doing this webcast today because we wouldn't have the bandwidth living in a small village, and that's perfectly understandable. But I mean, you mentioned there about the pubs, right, and about vacant pubs. However, if an active pub has, say, a function room, that they were willing to say, look, I'm quite happy during the day to make that available as a hot desk, would they still be considered for assistance in doing the conversion?
Yeah, there should be no reason why they wouldn't. I think what they will need to do is to design the equipment so that it can be easily folded away so that they can do their functions at the weekend. And like the reality is, they would probably have those hot desking facilities in place Monday to Friday because there's no one going to be using their function rooms in a lot of cases, and then at the weekend. So there are plenty, like I have a desk at home in my own house now, which I think was manufactured here in Inchicore in Dublin, which folds away and I put it in under the stairs in the evenings and a weekend. So, you know, there are very innovative people out there now that have come up with some very practical solutions. And there is no reason why that pub couldn't be used for that. The main objective behind the hubs is to try and bring people together because, you know, we've all done it over the last 12 months in terms of working from home and working from home pretty much permanently. And it is a very lonely, isolating spot. And the idea is by bringing people together in hubs that you can still do your work, but you can have a cup of coffee and a conversation with someone. And hopefully on foot of that someone might come up with another good business idea that might be able to create another job down the road as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, again, on that, like, I mean, with schemes in place like the Jobs Plus scheme, etc. I mean, there's so many opportunities there for small businesses when they're looking to take staff on, right? But a lot of people still have fear because of all the chaos that happened with JobsBridge previously and the amount of abuses that went on with JobsBridge that even people partaking in it were scared off by it. And I think that so schemes like Jobs Plus, there needs to be more talk about it. Schemes like the Back to Enterprise scheme, another fabulous social welfare scheme that's out there, but people don't actually know it exists. And I think this is part of what we need to do. As micro businesses, we need to start asking, well, what is actually out there and that we can use to help our business grow? Because our business grows, the government are happy because they're taking more tax off us. And for me personally, if I'm making enough money, I'm more than happy to pay them more tax.
Yeah, and just one thing, and I'm going to keep quiet then because I'll let everyone else come in. But one thing for every single small business out there or someone that has an idea, if they go to the SME Small Business Tool, just Google that SME Small Business Tool, and it's run by the Enterprise Ireland, and you put in your business idea or your actual business on that. It will give you the list of the various schemes, grants, and supports that are available to you to develop your particular business. And every single business in the country should be logging on to that.
Great. Well, again, we'll put that up on the page after the show.
So with this rural development, is it open to everybody, or will people who are moving back, who have family in the area, will they be prioritised, or is it on everybody goes in on a level playing field?
Everyone goes in on a level playing pitch. There probably will be, and the suggestion that I put to the minister is that you would only provide a grant into villages or towns where there's a large vacancy rate. Like if there's only, let's say, 2 or 3 properties in a local town that are vacant, the last thing you want is families moving from Dublin or Galway out competing local families that are already living there.
Yes.
But like we have villages, if you take a village like Ballinlough, where there is a large amount of vacant property there. There's weeds growing up in the front gardens of properties, where you have local families who would love to be able to buy a house, but can't get the deposit together for it. And they should be eligible for it, as well as someone moving from Dublin down to that location. The fibre optic cable is there. A lot of the local amenities, the schools, they've actually 2 schools in Ballinlough, both a Catholic and a Protestant school there, a Church of Ireland school there. It's on the main road to Castlebar, so it has a lot going for it. It's half an hour from an international airport, 20 minutes. So the opportunity is there for people to move into that location, bring life back into that community without undermining someone else that's from the area because of the level of vacant properties.
Yeah.
And can I ask,
just a concern?
Sorry, Geraldine.
Okay, Jennifer.
With a scheme like this, and while it's a fantastic scheme, are they worried about general, with all the working from home, and for a lot of people it will be permanent, even with those kind of hubs, are they worried about footfall for areas? And generally people working would have been a huge boost to a lot of local businesses and that kind of thing. So I wonder how they're going to bridge that gap between getting the place
You're raising the objection that the Department of Finance has put up in relation to this. So,
sorry.
The Department of Finance is quite willing to pay €30,000 to develop a site in Dublin, add to the congestion in Dublin, have more pressure on building office accommodation rather than housing accommodation in Dublin. For that very reason, they're saying that it's going to have an impact in the city centre of Dublin in terms of businesses that are reliant on footfall. Now, look, the reality is those businesses are closed at the moment. They're probably going to have to reinvent themselves regardless anyway, because a lot of companies have already, in the Silicon Docks, have already taken the decision to remote work. But what this can do is create that footfall in some of our towns and villages that haven't been there historically up to now. It also means that the price of rental accommodation in Dublin will come down. And I know the Department of Finance is worried, will this have an impact on pension funds? But I think they can suffer a little bit in relation to that. But it makes Dublin far more attractive then as a location for more corporate headquarters to relocate here, because it's bringing down what is a significant cost base that's there at the moment. So hopefully we'll have smaller size companies based in Dublin, more of them filling the existing office accommodation that is there, but more and more of those workers are working in locations that are not necessarily in the city centre of Dublin, taking pressure off the housing demand there.
Yeah, and I would think, sorry, and it's not just, I think, in terms of being in a capital city, but I think a lot of people were worried in already rural areas where footfall wouldn't be great. The working from home adds another dynamic to that. If the small bit of footfall, say, a rural area was getting was from people going in and out to offices, or working on site, like they're going to have that issue still, right? With a reduced footfall to people working from home. So it's across the board.
No, I don't think so. And that's why I said it at the start. We're going to see, I think, blended working. So,
Okay.
yeah, they may not be there 5 days a week in the local town.
Yeah.
They may be there 3 days a week in that local town. But the chances are there are going to be more people working there 3 days a week because you'll have people moved out of Dublin who are now going to work there in that hub 3 days a week. So, in fact, in the town of Ballinasloe, for example, now the local enterprise committee there are looking at seeing how they could redevelop the upper floors of some of the commercial buildings in the town into hot desking facilities, so people could work from the hub and then walk down the town to have their cup of coffee in the coffee shop and so forth, and actually increase town centre footfall.
Yes.
Great.
Right. Well, I think you've given us an absolutely fabulous overview on it there. So, looking forward, looking to the future, I'd love to hear from the panel what your views are as to life in Ireland over the next 3, 5, 10 years, assuming everything with the plan can work. Right? Where do you see things are going to improve? And I don't just mean, are we all going to have more money in our pocket? I mean, climate-wise, are we going to find we're getting better summers and slightly worse winters? Are we going to find that you can actually do a 20-minute drive in less than 2 hours if you're in Dublin?
I think work-life balance is something that people will reprioritise. And I think particularly for people in minority groups, those with disabilities, they ran into the issue pre-pandemic, the blockades from employers on flexible working, so on offices, and now suddenly I have mild cerebral palsy, so I was lucky to have employers that were always open to that, but a lot of people I know didn't. So the thing they're saying now is suddenly, when it was an option for everybody, flexible working became a thing. So I think what this has done is kind of pivot that and ensure that it probably won't go back to the 5 days a week in an office. I think particularly for self-employed people, what it has done is reinforce the fact that it is isolating. Even though it's great working from home, working for yourself, you do need that interaction. Even like my ideal would be 3 days in, to the rest from home. And I think either side of that, whether you're self-employed or not, or you've gone from the full thing to full-time to working from home, is that there has to be a happy medium for both groupings, because I think people have seen that actually there can be a really legitimate work-life balance, flexi time really put through, and that I think a lot of people don't want companies to, when this is all said and done, however long that may be, suddenly go, oh, well, let's just have it back to the way it was pre-pandemic. I don't think you're going to see that, particularly for people with families, young kids, particularly, working mums who want to kind of go back to work, and that I think there needs to be more, and indeed there needs to be more support if people are going to do that, because it will bring its own challenges. Working from home like the rural scheme.
I think it's important to look that any public-facing job is going to be virtually impossible to say, right, we can give you that flexi time to work your own hours, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? But for all back-end scenarios, I mean, take a simple example is look at the number of administration staff working in a hospital. And again, height of respect to anyone who can cope with working in a hospital, especially with the way things have been in the last 18 months. But I mean, how much space could be freed up? And even if the offices weren't being put into use immediately as treatment rooms or whatnot, just by shutting down the electricity in those rooms, right, and having them as spare rooms there as a potential overflow treatment rooms and whatnot, could be huge saving. But then the whole working from home thing then raises the question of GDPR. And it
Yes,
raises the
yes.
question about what entitlement do people have to actually take information or to be reading information off their company servers while they are at home.
Was at home. Yeah.
And then you get into the whole, well, if Ireland decide, well, okay, we're actually going to legislate for this and we're going to make allowances on condition that proper security measures, etc., proper firewalls and all are in place, are we then in breach of European regulations? And we're getting into what was raised by Facebook recently before one of the Dáil committees. You're getting into Irish law versus European law. And if they go one way or the other, they're breaking one or the other. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done to get the balance to the point where that can happen. But it certainly is something. I don't believe we'll ever see everyone going back to working in the office all the time. I think companies are starting to enjoy the fact that by having staff working at home, their overheads are reducing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there has to be a way of looking at, though, and giving people a better allowance for people when it comes to the whole thing of giving them an allowance towards their expenses for working from home, trying to get a better balance on that, because if you have somebody who's working full-time at home, or you have somebody working a half day as it currently stands, if you're working a full day or a half day at home, you're getting the same allowance for working at home. So it's just getting that balance just right on how you make the allowances for that. And I'm not sure that I have the answers, but it's something I definitely think we'll be discussing again over the coming months. So has anyone else any other thoughts about going forward in the future?
I just think everybody will have a different work-life balance. I think people saw the benefit. And I'd say I live in Dublin. I work very close to home, obviously, because of my job and all the rest. But I think for families who had to commute long distances to work, like people who lived and had to commute an hour and a half into work, that's 3 hours lost out of a family life. And I think people will definitely see a difference in that balance, and that's where people will see the benefit of working from home. But I agree with you, Rory, there has to be more support for people who actually are working from home, and a bit clearer about, even the benefits and the financial benefits and the tax benefits of working from home and the tax allowances, because that's not very clear either.
And I also think the social aspect is important. So having those hubs in areas where there isn't any, because you still need, I think for a lot of jobs, you still have that creative aspect of physically seeing other people and being in a team environment isn't quite the same over Zoom.
No.
And people need that. You forge a lot of friendships and important relationships in a work environment. I think that has to be really focused on as well by employers. To keep that up, because we all agree that, especially if you're not used to working from home, a lot of people need that office setting to really motivate them. So what can companies do to really make that, to really focus in on that for employees that need that stimulant? So I think that's important as well, something that companies are going to have to consider. That team building thing, whether it be, everyone doing a cocktail class on a Friday night, enjoying it over video or whatever it is until things open up. I think that aspect of it is hugely important.
Yeah, and I mean they are becoming. There are actually people have made a business out of online team building, things like the cocktail, the cookery, all of that type of thing, and there's so many options there. Well, listen, we're coming close to the end here, so we'll wind it up. I'd like to thank my guests today: Pauline from Pass Right Driving School, Geraldine from Legacy Mobile Dog Training, Jennifer McShane, freelance journalist, and of course Dennis Norton TD for joining us today. You have been watching the Lite Bite Lunch. My name is Rory Devlin. Our director has been Cheryl the Tax Fairy Fawcett, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks' time, where we look forward to chatting with you all then.
Storyblocks Audio. Storyblocks Audio. Storyblocks Audio.